Hello, everyone. Simon Jacobson here for another episode of Meaningful Live. Campuses on fire. What is going on? So we've all been seeing the latest disturbing events on campuses, particularly pro-Hamas, anti-Israel protests. Many of them clearly anti-Semitic. How are we to see this? How are we to look at this? Let's talk about that. This program is dedicated to get the dedication. It's dedicated by Tomislav Peranovic. Now, clearly, I'm Jewish, so you can imagine where my sentiments are. And I want to be fully transparent. But I also try to look at it in a more global and universal way. We're all subjective, but we try to be as open-minded as possible. When you start hearing about years and years of planning, that these protests are not just spontaneous outbursts, you realize it's not exactly what was going on in the 60s with the Vietnam War. Even though I'm sure there was also political motivation there and much behind the scenes, but there was a sentiment among the students and among the country that was turning against the Vietnam War. Here, there's something far more insidious happening. That's very clear. There, nobody attacked other students. Nobody attacked any particular country and particular race. It was a protest against government policy, wanting to end the war. There are many, many differences. But above all, think of it this way. A university is supposed to be a place where all ideas flow. All ideas. Pro-Israel, anti-Israel. But it's not supposed to be a place of violence. A place where people attack or hurt others. The fact that when you hear about commencements being canceled, students not being able to go to class. I mean, parents are paying a tuition. And then when you know the facts, and I come from a world of media, so I can tell you, the millions and billions of dollars being spent to capture the minds of innocent, impressionable students of the media of Hollywood, to advance a narrative that is quite horrendous. It is comparable to Nazi ideology. I mean, when you hear about what happened on October 7th, yes, I understand context and all the lines that are being used, but the bottom line, the raping of women, the burning of children, of families, the atrocities perpetrated, there's no way to justify that. As a Jew, I can say, yes, 6 million of us were killed in concentration camps. Did you see any concerted effort by Jews to go ahead and try to do anything similar of these atrocities to the Germans? To the collaborators, to those that were complicit in their silence? There are many ways to deal with grievances. But I don't want to address that. I want to address the campuses in the United States. I'm a firm believer that the silent majority of the United States absolutely abhor this behavior, abhor anti-Semitism. I don't think there's a growing anti-Semitism. There's a loud anti-Semitism. The volume has gone up with a very clear intention. And that's where you can compare it to Nazi propaganda. That this isn't just about Israel policies in the United States supporting Israel, it's anti-Jewish. Jews have been hurt. Threats to synagogues. So you're dealing here with something that is about morality itself. First they turn on the Jews and then they turn on everyone else. That's how it works. So though I am coming from a subjective place, But to me, what is most outstanding is that the United States has not yet woken up. People are pretty passive. There's a baseball season, there's entertainment to go to, there's travel. It's not yet hit home. It's not affected the average person. Pearl Harbor affected the average American. Once we saw that happen, America declared war. So this may sound perhaps strange to some of you, but I think there's a blessing in disguise here. There's an expression in the book of Daniel that says that in the end of times there'll be clarity. There'll be clarity. Would you rather know who your enemies, or would you rather not know? Remember, in warfare, psychological warfare is trying to hide. That's intelligence. You don't want people to know where the enemy is. To me, it's a blessing in the fact, let everyone come out of the woodwork. Let the universities expose themselves. Let the boards and the presidents determine whether this is worth it for them and their brands. If I were a businessman and I had the money, I would invest right now in creating a new university. Remember the Harvard and the Yales and the Columbias and the UCLAs and the Stanfords. They're all entities. Their brand has been seriously tarnished. Maybe now is the time to create a new university. Get the best professors, hire them away, the best students, say this will be a university, a sterling principal university that is living up to the highest standards of academic excellence, of objectivity, of airing out disagreements in a way civil people do so, in an intelligent way, the Talmudic style. You can argue passionately, but not a political agenda, and definitely not one based on hate and not based on putting on masks and hiding yourself in your identity. All happening in a place that's called education. So this is exposing, frankly, the bankruptcy of academia. Who says that these colleges are the places to send your children and students to? Is that where they're going to get their best education? They can't even go to class in some places. So I think it's actually a reality check. A market correction, if you wish, a wake-up call to understand what is academia. So let's talk a moment about that, education. I think the idea of a moral vision, moral compass. Regardless whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, whether this is Israel, pro-Israel, anti-Israel, let us say this attack was on blacks or LBGT. Would it elicit the same reaction? You tell me. I don't even need to answer that. What does that tell you? That when it comes to Jews, when it comes to Israel, suddenly they're free target practice? It tells you about the insidious agenda. And it reveals something about academia that I think is critical for us to understand. When the Enlightenment came about a few hundred years ago, and in many ways it did expose the corruption, the absolute corrupt authority of religion, and other monarchs and fascists and totalitarians. However, it went, as many understand today, a little too far. It decided that science will replace faith. Modernity will replace religion. And many thought that will happen. Maybe there'd be religion as some of the French Enlightenment, Voltaire and others thought would be for the masses. But the intelligent people would reject because it's superstition. They forgot to remember that science does not offer a moral vision. Science is morally neutral. That's why it was not difficult to see how the Nazis, who were considered to be the most sophisticated, the Germans, in science and philosophy and the arts, suddenly you had doctors, academics, who legitimized Nazi ideology, who experimented with anesthesia, defying their very vow on innocent men, women, and children, on twins. Because academia is morally neutral. And if it's guided by the wrong agenda, it can become the most horrible, the most efficient way to create a killing machine. This wasn't what many Germans would dismiss as a third world tribal country somewhere in Africa. I'm not saying that. I'm saying some would call it that. It's a sophisticated, considered advanced culture. But when you're lacking a accountability to a higher calling, what some call God, I don't need to use the word God, because I'm not looking to make a God argument here. I'm looking to make an argument for the opposite of self-worship. when academia becomes an instrument, a support for self-worship, it actually makes things far worse. An ignorant person, an uneducated person would never come up with the scientific prowess and technologies that someone that has that scientific approach and method. That's how it is. More knowledge, the more power, the more technology, the more you can destroy. That's why it's even more important after the Enlightenment to have a spiritual center, to have a spiritual transcendent calling. Take that away, and human beings can become what's worse than savages. Yes, much worse. So when you look at the world of academia, that's a place where we're supposed to be pursuing objective truth the best we can, as best we can. So it reminds me of a Bertrand Russell. I don't know if it's an urban legend or not, but it definitely captures an interesting, I would even say, arrogance of the academic world, where he was once caught doing something unethical, having an affair with one of his students. The Ethics Committee of Cambridge, I believe, called him in. You're a professor of ethics, Dr. Russell. How could you behave unethically? And he smiled nonchalantly, without missing a beat, said, I'm also a professor of mathematics and I'm not a triangle. Capturing the essence of what many academics believe is their ivory tower. What I teach is not me. What I am is not what I teach. What I teach is not necessarily who I am. I'm an objective observer. I observe from a distance. I give you an objective picture, as if that objectivity is deified. But in truth, it's a way of disconnecting, a total dissonance between who you are. If I look at you and you're my professor, and you're teaching me ethics, and then I see arrogance in you, and I see unethical behavior, you don't think that's an education? Contrast that with Maimonides, who says, you want to know who the wise person is? Don't look at their academic skills. Don't look at their oratory or their verbal arguments and the case they make, their brilliance. Look at how they walk, how they talk, how they speak, how they treat others, how they eat and how they drink and how they sleep. Their behavior will tell you more about their wisdom than their minds. Computers are more brilliant than any mind today. Purely, we're talking about pure brain power. But they don't have an ethical center. They don't have a soul or a heart. Can AI create and simulate it? I'm sure we can simulate it to some extent. Whatever you put in, junk out. If you put in Bertrand Russell's attitude or other scientists' attitude, then the machines will be equally dispassionate and equally morally neutral or worse. In other words, there's more to life than purely what it says in the books. There's how you live your life. That you see is lacking. Where's the moral conscience? The Nazis focused immediately on the universities. They knew they had to have the professors and the universities on their side. And they succeeded. When you heard those chilling statements in the testimony of the presidents of MIT and Harvard and Penn State, or the University of Pennsylvania, I'm not sure. When they were asked the question, does it break school policy, university policy, when someone calls for the genocide of the Jews? They all answered, it depends on context. Would they answer that the killing of Floyd in a black man? Or the persecution of LBGT or transgender? Would they have the nerve to say that? Context? Genocide is genocide. You may have opinions, you may have reasons and so on. But if there's no line in the sand, no red line, in morality, you're lost. And that's where an education becomes disconnected. We live in the most literate times. People can read, they're officially literate. High standard of living, prosperity, comforts like unprecedented. And yet there's also an unprecedented lack of sense of right and wrong. Ask young men and women today, especially in the Western world, the United States, what are you ready to fight for? And I'm not talking about a video game or a sports team or a Hollywood celebrity. What are you ready to fight for? We become spoiled. We become apathetic. when we don't have to, when our values are not crystallized in times of challenge. Here we have a challenge. America will wake up, I believe that sincerely, because it's going to come back to haunt everyone. That's how it works. If you look at the history of Hitler and the Nazis, initially, you want it to go away. You want to minimize it. But then when you start seeing certain things, you just can't ignore it. Remember how Biden was speaking the days after October 7th? But now he has an election on his hands. I'm not even talking, I feel bad for him. He looks like a mannequin. He doesn't look like he's fully there. And I'm not here to criticize him. But this just shows a country that's living in a plastic type of, just as celluloid heroes, as they say. And when there's an election and there's other factors, then suddenly your mind changes. Not necessarily your fundamental beliefs and values. You start justifying different things. No one is here going to defend any war. But Israel's war is completely justified. What would any other country do? Do me a favor. What would the United States do if 300 drones and missiles and ballistic and so on were suddenly hit New York or Washington, or even if they were destroyed in the air, but they came from Canada or Mexico? What do you think would happen? The point I'm making, frankly, is going back to moral clarity. It's time to reclaim our universities or create new ones that will offer a true moral vision for life. That is the single most important thing. Not doctors and lawyers and accountants and computer programmers and financial advisors. A moral center, a heart, a soul. What do we stand for? So at the end of it all, it is a blessing in disguise. We all wish it wouldn't happen, but this reveals things. It forces you to take a stand. Now, initially, as always, early adopters are far and few. And in between, far and in between, they say, right? Or few and in between, whatever the expression is. But slowly. So, as time passes, I believe more and more people will realize what's going on and understand that it's time to take back control over the minds of our children who are being poisoned, or even worse, due to ignorance, are a breeding ground for any radical, ridiculous is not even the right word, distorted fabrications, propaganda, and lies. So what do? The best defense is offense. It's speaking up, as I'm doing right now. It's providing clarity. You, I, we all have that responsibility. A little light dispels much darkness. A little intelligence, I'm talking about true intelligence, dispels ignorance. Oscar Wilde famously said, it's not that today more people are literate. It's that today illiterate people know how to read. Think about it. Now you may say he's not exactly the moral paragon either, but it doesn't matter, it's a good line. The point being is education is much more than knowledge. It's much more than data. It's knowing not what to think, but how to think. How to think like a decent person. The founding fathers of this country are another example. They came from the persecutions in Europe. They came from the dominance of King George. They were apologetic in the Declaration of Independence. That finally people have to take a stand, however. And they took a stand, and that pressure created a country based on fundamental principles that are unwavering. We find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, all people are created equal, and endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights. That is the foundations, the inalienable rights. Yes, you have the right of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, but you have no right to take someone else's freedom away, or in any other way to impede someone else from pursuing their rights. These are the fundamental principles, and they're not being stated clearly enough. That's what we should re-embrace. And we don't have to recreate the wheel. It's all there. It's all written. The Constitution and the Declaration doesn't talk about how to create economic opportunity and so on. It says, feed, nourish the very core essence of human freedom, and people will thrive. People will contribute. People will build. They'll innovate. And look what happened. But in some ways, we've lost our way. But the good news is the fundamentals are still there. and we can find that way again. But we cannot be quiet. We have to speak up. And this is not about pro-Israel, anti-Israel, pro-Jewish or anti. It's about pro-human, pro-life, not anti-life, not death. There's distortion of creating a moral equivalence as if certain death is allowed. No, unacceptable. 34,000 civilians, they say, are killed in Gaza. I don't even know if those numbers are true. Who's to blame? Tell me, who's to blame? Those that refuse to lay down their arms. Had Hamas surrendered and returned the hostages, and especially had changed their constitution, you wouldn't have any deaths. Imagine they did that after killing 1,200, massacring 1,200 innocent men, women, and children. Had they done that, what do you think would have happened? They wouldn't have attacked Gaza. Surrendered, and then terms would have been dictated by the winner, unconditional surrender by the enemy, by the loser, and that would be that. Nobody talks about that. They've changed the narrative. That's how you get ceasefires. Imagine the Germans in the last days before Berlin fell said, okay, you know what? We'll give you a few hostages, a few Jews that are in the concentration camps. It's not how it works after what you've done. Unconditional surrender, and the winner dictates the terms. Nobody talks about that. So it's a clearly great propaganda campaign. I cry for every innocent person dying, but you have to know who's killing them. Yes, who's killing them? Talk about Rafah. It's about the civilians. There's a reason why, because Hamas is surround themselves with civilians. To me, these are obvious truths, and I hope to you as well. And now the campuses, the complete distortion. Sit down someone, have an intelligent conversation, and they'll tell you about colonialism and about apartheid and about oppression, and how Israel are like the Nazis, and they're keeping them under occupation. What would have happened had the Hamas spent the billions of dollars and built resorts? They have beautiful beachfronts there, Mediterranean, and they'd have $1 billion or millions of dollar industry of tourism. What would have happened? No. It's a war. Yes, it's a war against Israel, once against the Jewish people. I hope the silent majority wakes up and begins to talk, and begins to talk firstly at the elections, to vote for the right candidates. I'm not going to tell you what candidate to vote for, but vote for candidates that will stand up for a moral vision. Do we have such candidates today? Well, that's another discussion. But my point is, we need to be clear about what is right and what is wrong. And this is an opportunity of a lifetime. In a lifetime. These things don't happen every day. So what's going on the campuses? What's going on is a revelation, a revealing, an exposure, I should say, of a decay that's been happening for years and years and maybe decades and maybe centuries. And finally you see it expressing itself this way, rearing its ugly head. It's a direct result of a concerted effort by very bad forces in the world that are trying to take control and affect the pure minds of American young men and women. And we have to fight it with everything we have, because that's what the United States is about. I would litigate these universities and their boards, let them be litigated for discrimination, lawsuits, class action suits, parents, what are they paid for their tuition? Should government funding be going to discriminatory universities that are protecting, that are not allowing students to be protected, that are allowing political voices to dominate, that threaten others? The list goes on. We have to take control. Take control back. We have to take control back of our universities, of our youth, to allow free ideas to flow, to destroy the cancel culture, to cancel the cancel culture, maybe is the right word, and come back to having civil discourse like intelligent, sensitive people, as it was from the beginning of this nation's founding. This just touches the tip of the iceberg of some of the ideas that I'd like to share. I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, your agreements or disagreements. Let's talk about it. That's the first and most important step of all. This has been Simon Jacobson, Meaningful Life. Meaningfullife.com is our website. Please subscribe to all our offerings, to our many offerings, to our YouTube channel. Please share. And again, love to hear your feedback, thoughts, and comments and suggestions. Be well and be blessed, and may God bless America and God bless our men and women of this country, our boys and girls, to find that clarity that's necessary. May we rise up and show the world what it means to lead a country, lead a world with a moral vision and a moral compass that allows everyone equal opportunity without any oppression, without fear, and without any intimidation. Only beautiful things. Thank you and be well.